Okay, and we're live. Well, I'm just going to go straight into it. Welcome. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the And I think a lot of us have seen this. It's an ongoing argument in the industry, and there's certainly strong advocates on either side of the fence. So we're hoping to put this argument to rest once and for all. Allow me to introduce you all today, our panelists. We have Coleman Collins, who's a senior consultant in user experience and product design. He's based in Chicago. We have James Cook, who's a product designer based in our London office. Barbara Wolf-Dick, who is a design lead out of Porto Alegre, Brazil. Stuart Curran, who is Head of Experience Design for Europe. The panelists will spend the next 15 minutes or so presenting their opening statements to you all, so you'll certainly get a good sense of which side of the fence each one of them is on. We'll then have about 15 minutes of free-form discussion based on 3 key questions that I'll be asking. And then we'll open up for the final 15 minutes for all of your questions, dear audience. We're also doing a bit of a before and after poll. So we're kind of interested to see if anyone's opinion does change throughout. So I'll just drop the link to the poll in the chat window there for you all. And without further ado, I am going to hand over to our first panelist, Coleman Collins. Over to you, Coleman.
That's me. So, kind of in a sentence, yes, absolutely, designers should code. Must designers code? I think that's a different question. But should they? Most definitely. The only real good counter-argument I ever hear in this space is it's impossible to be a good designer and a good developer. And I think that's bullshit. It's not impossible, it's just difficult. And I think this kind of, the secret thing that we're saying there, the danger of becoming an ineffectual generalist, knowing too little about too much, is a lie that people tell themselves an excuse not to be better at more things. Being good at more things makes you better at all of those things. And it can't happen overnight. You can't learn these skills in a day. And it's frankly a recent ask of the design community, which means these people are still rare. But they exist, and more are going to exist every day, because designers who can code are valuable. Among the myriad things a product designer can be good at the same time, the knowledge and ability to write even production-level code, although not necessarily, is one of the most valuable cross-disciplinary skills they can have. Because code is ultimately what we make. It's the end game. Anything that you make that is not production code is a deliverable. It's a piece of a process. It's ultimately waste. So if you can actually work directly into the thing that we're making, that is an incredibly valuable skill a designer can have.
Awesome. Thank you, Coleman. Over to you, James. What's your view?
Thanks, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Okay, let me quote the Twitters. Honestly, I'm shocked that in 2010, I'm still coming across web designers who can't code their own designs. No excuse. That was Elliot J. Stocks. He's currently the creative director at Adobe Typekit. He's very much a designer's designer. That was 5 years ago. Let's remind ourselves, so design is the creation of a plan or a drawing to show the look and functioning of an object before it's made. This is the dictionary. And here's my point. Without a solid understanding of the concepts inherent to the medium you're designing for, I don't think you're a designer, you're an illustrator. Let's just clarify this discussion. It's about digital designers producing work for the web and for mobile apps. And by code, we pretty much mean HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I don't believe designers should have to produce releasable code, but they should know code. Whether it's just so they can hack something together, to test an idea, or so they understand the limits of what is and is not technically feasible. Knowing code gives you the vocabulary to best express your ideas. Knowing code helps you understand the needs of your developers. The decisions we as designers make directly impacts how long and to what cost the production will take. The knowing code empowers you to make smarter design decisions. Ultimately, designers should do whatever they're comfortable with. But digital things, they run from code. And to know code, well, that just empowers you to be a better designer. Thank you.
Thanks so much, James. Okay, Barbara, let's hear from you. What's your opinion on this matter?
Hey. Oh, hey. First, I'm sorry, I woke up with the flu. My voice is not sounding the better, so sorry in advance. So I strongly believe that we as designers that work with digital should be willing to understand the gears of software. If you're designing interactions for digital environments and you don't know how that will be translated to code, when the product you have been working on is alive, the best you get is an approximation of what you intended to do. When you are a designer and you don't know how to code, you are designing analogies. And analogies are great, but they are not univocal. And they are good for explaining like abstract concepts. They are not easily comprehended, or that might not exist yet, but they will always be like this third bank of the river, somewhere you want to reach, but it's not possible. So when you are working on a new task in your story, you are creating a visual concept of something, of how something might be presented to a user. But you're not in control of what will be presented to the user. Not that you will control this all the time, but not being able to perceive or understand how this will be implemented sort of adds an extra layer of difficulty that probably will put you on a situation of creating a bigger design depth for your project than you needed to. And if you deliver just a mock-up to a developer, there is nothing that guarantees you that you will see exactly what you drew in your browser. This, on a bigger period of time, might have a huge impact on your project. And it's not the case of everyone mastering the art of software development, or you being pixel perfect crazy with devs. If you learn how to code, you will design better products and give your user a chance of a better experience because you will empathize with the coding process. So digital design is still very influenced by graphic design languages and conventions. And we will never evolve or discover what can be done if we stay inside our safe cave, drawing layouts in fancy software and writing user test methods in our beautiful crafted notebooks, and imagine user flows with post-its. You should learn how to code and be good at it.
Oh, are we back? I think the connection kind of dropped out for me a little bit. Sorry about that. Barbara, did you finish? Thank you so much. Okay, Stuart, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So, should designers code? Well, that's a problematic statement, of course. And we could choose to spend the next hour defining our terms, but then we wouldn't have any fun arguing. So with that in mind, I'm going to say no, designers shouldn't code. And my argument is pretty simple. It's all about the opportunity cost. The ability to code does give designers a tactical advantage. And that's particularly important if you work as part of a cross-functional team. But I think this comes at a cost. And the cost is that of the opportunity to focus on design leadership at a more strategic level. Any good designer should know their materials and their constraints, of course, but knowing about code and how code works is not the same as knowing how to write code. Conflating the two can actually be dangerous. In the same way as a designer who does their own research to inform the designs may be at risk of marking their own homework, a designer who implements their own designs is at risk of allowing their knowledge about what is feasible to constrain their thinking about what is actually needed. It's okay if a designer chooses to learn to code, but we must recognise this is a choice, and one that's often made based upon a predominant mode of thinking. Would any designer who codes ever argue against coding? Part of the problem involves stepping outside of your own context and experience. Designers who spend too much time at the code face don't realise the opportunities to apply their skills in other, more valuable ways. Where does the real opportunity lie for differentiation in software design? Technology is becoming a commodity. When this happens, the focus is on driving down price, and designers who can code are of course great value for money. But the design is also a strategic differentiator, one that opens doors to new kinds of value based on an experiential understanding of the world. This can only happen if designers take the time to lead the way and not be chained to the short-term tactical thinking that coding encourages. And that's my opening statement. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Stuart. Okay, audience, you have heard from your 4 panelists. I'm now going to open up with the first question to the panelists. Guys, how much do designers really need to know about code, and why is it even important in our roles?
That's the last time I let Stuart see my notes in advance. Okay, so I'll kick this off, Sarah. So as UX folks, I mean, we make a pretty big deal about thinking visually and encouraging everyone, including our developers, to sketch. So why wouldn't we hold ourselves to the same expectation? Certainly from my experience over my career, as I've learned more and more about technical concepts, at the beginning unwillingly, I do feel it's made me a better designer. Certainly when I have 2 solutions, multiple options in front of me, and I know that one is half the complexity, therefore half the cost and time to turn that around, I go for that. And that insight does come from a knowledge of the code and the implications of the design decisions I'm making. And ultimately, it's because I want to get something working as quickly as possible. I'd much rather put a real piece of software, albeit a lightweight solution, in front of the user than a prototype, because then that feedback can go directly into the working software. That is one of the agile tenets, which is working software over anything else. Once I've then validated that solution, then we can look back around and we can kind of come back and add that greater fidelity. But I do feel that the knowledge that comes from understanding how code works and the impacts of the discussions and the conversations I have, that directly influences me as a designer.
So I would say that designers just need to know enough about code so that developers can't bullshit you about what can and cannot be done. And I think that's as far as it goes for me, because I think when you get too deep into it and you start kind of thinking in that way, you're putting on a slightly different hat and you're thinking about things in a slightly different way. There's many opportunities I've seen where there's been problems in code, and without actually knowing what's necessarily going on in the code, just from sort of talking to developers and saying, what are you trying to achieve here? That because you're naturally a designer, you're inclined to think more laterally. You can, by being not too attached to the code, you can actually suggest solutions that maybe weren't apparent to the people who are kind of coding. So I would say just enough to know what's feasible and what's not, but don't take it any further than that.
Why not, though? Why don't take it further?
Because I think your mode of thinking changes. I think you're losing sight of the fact that the value of you as a designer is because of the way you think about the world. And I think when you become too entrenched in coding and thinking kind of logically about what follows what, I think you kind of lose sight of the edges, and it's the edges where the kind of opportunity lies.
I definitely don't have a logical brain, but I can still hack together a little bit of marketing styles.
Oh, as can I. I mean, but I readily acknowledge my limitations there, right? I'm a dabbler, and I'm nothing more than a dabbler. I don't want to learn any more than I currently do, enough to be able to knock some stuff together, and I'm totally comfortable with those limitations.
Just to counter your argument there, Stuart, I'd also argue the opposite, in the sense that particularly some of the more native interactive aspects of the digital world, or let's take technology, so HTML, CSS, HTML5 form validation, CSS3 animations, scripting behaviors, actually knowing what options exist there, and I'm going to make a leap and say, that they're there because you understand how to write those languages. That can totally inspire new creative opportunities, right?
That's true. It can also constrain you in ways that are quite unpleasant as well. I mean, if we're talking about HTML5 form validation, I mean, how much control have you got over the way that stuff looks? I mean, sometimes it just looks absolutely kind of horrible, and it's not the optimal experience that you would want to design. So
that's an interesting point. But so I tend not to get too hung up on how things are presented. I'm totally comfortable with something visually appearing different across devices and browsers. I'd rather spend that time focusing on making sure that those validations in, maybe that the content is clear and usable. So I think, again, that knowledge of code allowing you to deliver a lower fidelity solution first, to be able to validate those assumptions that we're all very good as designers. I feel that's empowering.
I have a slightly different tack on that, which is I think the fear that you'll somehow lose your mindset as a designer is a false fear. I don't think that skills acquisition is a zero-sum game. I think, yes, to your point, Stuart, there's a limit of the number of hats you can wear at any given time. I can't be a developer and a designer on a project at the same moment, or even really there's some switching cost in the same day sometimes, to be perfectly honest. But I think knowing more makes you better at all the things that you know. It allows you to see that laterality that you're talking about. And I think there's a false fear in that, because I do this, and I normally don't like the idea of, oh, you're born a designer, it's the way you think. But to a certain extent that's true. I come at the world with a designer's mindset. I've trained myself to do that over a very long time, and I think knowing a little bit more about the options available to me in, like James is saying, form validation, don't risk me not thinking about the problem in other ways. Don't risk that laterality. It just gives me a deeper view of a certain piece of it.
Would you say that designers who can't code are limited in their careers? Just to riff off that a bit.
If you want to go more techy, yeah. We usually talk that designers should know how to code, and we stay only with HTML and CSS and stuff like that. But if you go deeper and you want to understand more about performance, or I don't know, stuff from database, you go to a new world where you can see all the possibilities that are lying there, and just developers are looking at it. So it's not you sort of miss the opportunities that you have for innovation if you stay focused only on building this, as I said before, analogies. You're just like drawing things that could be done with these things and you might have see some HTML in your life once, but if you have ever sit down in front of a computer and trying to write some Java or something like that, you see that things can go different, and you start thinking in a different way when you are designing some, I don't know, some small software or some feature or something like that. Your mind just goes to another place. You're not thinking just about colors and typography and this graphic stuff that you learn in college. You start thinking more about all the great things that could be done, and no one ever looked at it because they thought it was too difficult, or they thought that this was only developer's job or something like that.
That's how it works, right?
Yes, go.
That was going to happen sooner or later. I just wanted to build on what Father raised there about performance. That certainly, performance is user experience. It is very much a hot theme. I see a lot of people, a lot of the writing names talking about them, and part of that is responsive design. The mobile world has arrived. Yet something like I don't quite remember the stat, but the average page weight of modern websites is over a megabyte. It's crazy, and I can't help that is one artifact of a static design, content tool approach to the world, rather than say a content-led or a true mobile-first responsive-led approach to delivering digital products. I think again that awareness of the impacts of the design decisions we're making, and that's not just to Stuart's point around the design solution. Is this thing fit for purpose? But actually, when you do get to the fun stuff around visuals and typography and animation and scripting behaviors, all of those things. Let me quote someone far more intelligent. With great power comes great responsibility.
So I feel I'm swimming against the tide of this argument a little bit, and I'll give you my reasons why. So I mean, I started out many years ago as a sort of front end developer, and I think, I learned how to kind of code stuff, and my skills are so rusty now. I mean, you wouldn't want to kind of put me on the kind of production code at all. I mean, I still dabble in it, but part of that knowledge and that kind of understanding was I wanted to get behind, okay, I know how to make this thing now, but what makes it really good, and what kind of lies behind that. And as a result of that, I kind of got into doing more information architecture and went down that path to kind of really get behind the information and what kind of, how do you structure things well. And then from that you start to kind of get more into the organizational side of it and say, well, how can we set ourselves up for success? How can we design the project in the right way so that we're going to make it happen? You start to kind of see the blockers at a higher level, I think. And I think that's true of a lot of designers. After a certain number of years, you start to kind of push more and more into that kind of higher level, that kind of strategic level, because you see ultimately where the problem lies is in the business itself, is in the enterprise, and actually you start thinking, well, maybe my time and my energy is better spent unblocking it at that level rather than caring too much about crafting it at the kind of very small kind of UI level. And I think that's where my thinking is going, really, and I think I'm not alone in that in terms of some of the people I speak to as well. It's actually a lot of designers want to move up the ladder and kind of get more involved directly in the decision making process, and actually bring their kind of mode of thinking to the table and actually demonstrate the advantages that design kind of thinking can kind of bring to enterprises.
Stuart, would you concede that however long ago that background, that knowledge from your coding days has influenced the way you view these organizational problems, and it does color how you might suggest tackling some of those problems? You're muted.
Stuart is muted, yeah. You should be okay now, Stuart.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Oh, cool. I don't know how I managed to mute myself. My hands were not anywhere near the keyboard there. So one of the things I was thinking about this earlier, and I was thinking, actually, it's quite addictive, I mean, I still get a little bit of a kick out of it, when you get like an unstyled HTML page and you suddenly hook some CSS up to it and it's like magic, right? It still feels that way to me, and I think that makes me a little bit suspicious, because it makes me feel like, I'm more ready to fall in love with my ideas and my designs because of that addictive nature of kind of working with code. And for that reason, I want to step away from it. I want to make a conscious decision not to go down that road, because I think there's more value in having other people who specialize in that and can do a much better job than I can, and actually provide more of an oversight. I mean, that's where I think my kind of skills and experience are of most benefit now.
For sure. I think I actually agree with you on this. I think there are many, many levers that you can pull to sort of become a better, more impactful, more valuable designer. And code is just one of them. And it's not the right one to pull for every single person. There are certain people that work better in that world, or work better farther up the tool chain, or whatever it might be. I think we should definitely tease apart the idea that it's a requirement of a good designer, and rather I think it's a valuable skill for a certain kind of designer that works in a certain space, that works with a certain type of size of team and certain type of problem space. I think to have a conversation about what the different levers you can pull and if code is the most valuable is a different conversation than having one about can they or should they, because I just want to tease that apart a little bit.
We did say it was a problematic statement, didn't we?
It certainly is.
Okay, guys. Yeah, bandwidth is not the greatest here. I'm sorry, it keeps dropping in and out. I just wanted to definitively answer the question. is there a danger of us as designers becoming too generalist if we do start touching the code? And we have answered this in a sort of a roundabout way, but if someone could just give a direct answer on this, that would be wonderful.
So, I mean, I'll pick this up if everyone's not too tired of hearing my opinions yet. So actually, there's a point that Coleman made earlier that I agree with about being good at things in breadth. In breadth, there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. I totally agree with that. Actually, I think so. There's no real danger in becoming too generalist, because actually knowing about a lot of things in the broad sense is actually kind of really good, you know, because you don't necessarily know the problem you're going to face tomorrow and what skills that's going to draw upon. You know, you might be thinking you're doing some interaction design, and actually you need to try and figure out how to plan the kind of research or something like that. You know, so having some sort of familiarity in a broad sense is good. I think that where we differ maybe a little bit is, you know, there's breadth and there's depth, and I think I don't agree that, you know, I think learning to code can represent, you know, you can be going a little bit too deep into one area there and actually becoming more of an engineer than a designer. But to come back to the point anyway, I mean, the reason I think it's okay to be a generalist is because actually it goes back to my opening statement. I think of design as a strategic capability. So I'm actually perfectly comfortable with someone who is not a designer getting involved in the design process. I mean, I actually think of design more, everyone knows about design thinking, I think of it more in terms of behaviors and the kind of behaviors you want to foster in your colleagues and in the organization you're working with. And those behaviors are things like, you know, being able to readily empathize with the customer, you know, to act as a proxy for customers in conversations, being able to be the first person to visualize a problem, for example, to whatever fidelity that might be. It might be a rubbish sketch on a whiteboard. If it were me, it could equally be, if you have the skills, mock something up in the browser. You know, but visualizing things is the key behavior there that I would focus on. And then finally, it's the collaboration side of things as well. It's that, you know, design is as a process of synthesis, and I think that's why I actively want to step away from doing too much, because I know there's value in my ideas colliding with someone else's ideas, and actually the end result being better. So for that reason, you know, I'm quite happy to be a generalist, and as I said before, I'm perfectly happy with my limited skill set.
I'll add to that a little bit. I think there's no inherent danger. I think it's very possible to be an ineffectual generalist, but that's on you. That is the dabbler. That is sort of the classic dabbler, right? Where the jack of all trades, master of none. It's a personality type, and it's a person I think we see in our professional world. But there's no inherent danger in learning things, I don't think. There's inherent danger of thinking you know more than you do, and thinking you're more effective than you are. And that's a failure of ego, not of the subjects you're learning or the knowledge that you have, I don't think.
And yeah. So in your view, oh sorry, go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, just to add, if you see code as a tool, I don't think that could be like a generalist. You're not trying to be a dev or something. You're not trying to change your role, you know. So I think it's as James said in his opening statement. It's so weird that we still are having this conversation, you know, that why code shouldn't be a tool to design stuff. Why are we so afraid of that? Just
because it's a different one than we're used to. Because at least sort of people in our age group of our background, because, you know, digital designer is still a fairly novel thing. We all started with Photoshop. We all started with these tools that aren't actually code, and we got really good at them. And yeah, I think now we're afraid to switch. I mean, even just I haven't touched Sketch ever, and I hear it's a wonderful piece of software because I don't know it. That's a bullshit reason. It's a terrible reason. And I think it's the same thing with code. It's just a tool, and if we understand that it's just a tool, I think it can be really valuable. But it's a new thing to learn, and that's scary, right?
So I'll offer up an analogy here that kind of betrays my advanced years a little bit. I mean, I remember working at a print designers with a graphic designer, and talking to the guys who still did all the lithographic printing, and how much they were moaning about the fact that there's this thing called Quark Express, right? And these designers, they don't need to know anything about the printing process anymore, and it's a really, really bad thing. And actually, you know, we kind of know how that's turned out. So I think there's no harm in choosing to not go to that degree, you know, and actually sort of saying, yeah, I know how to design. These tools come along, they make it sort of simpler for me. I mean, I'll happily take those tools, right? I mean, if it saves me some time during the day, I can make an extra cup of tea or something because I don't have to kind of spend too much time, you know, finessing stuff to the nth degree, then I'm perfectly happy with that. But I think it's an old argument, and I think it's an old argument in web terms. It's an even older argument in terms of just technology in general, you know, and how technology has made its way into the kind of old design process, how it's affected the kind of roles of designers.
Just to take that print example, Stuart, actually, there's a whole renaissance of designers, both digital and offline, going back to those printing tools and realizing not only the opportunities that it opens up to play and dabble, but to reinforce the learning of your day-to-day work. It's nice to see that. So it seems like we're going to be having this argument for another 25 years.
Well, let's flip the question a little bit. So, you know, we're talking as design.
So we wait until Sarah comes back.
Oh, am I back?
Yep. Well, you might want to just repeat that, Sarah.
Yes, so let me repeat that. We were sort of talking about designers learning a little bit about code, but to flip that, I mean, should engineers learn a little bit about design, or would that just cause huge issues for the design community?
I think democratizing design, and for the sake of argument here, I'm going to take that to mean graphic design and visual design, I think is massively empowering. Not only if it's for a developer picking a color scheme for their IDE that won't strain their eyes so much, or if it's a project manager trying to communicate something through a reporting spreadsheet. Actually, I think typography, color theory, these kinds of things benefits everyone, shouldn't just be black magic that's left to the designers in their safe cave there in Brazil with Barbara.
I agree. I think, well, first of all, developers are already typographers. If you've ever had a debate with someone about dashes versus or tabs versus spaces, that's a typography choice. Camel case, snake case, typographic choice. Why we use monospace fonts? Because of typography, because of the effect of letters and words on understanding. They just aren't good at it, or not necessarily good at it, and I think that's a disservice. But more generally, I think the role of a good designer is often collaborator and editor. So even if they don't have these skills, giving them that ability, that knowledge to speak in your language rather than always having to come to them and speak in their language, which is what I think most of us are more used to doing, is incredibly empowering. It makes them feel like they actually, because they're going to have input either way, even if they don't realize it, even if it's, you know, by griping about how difficult something is to implement, but giving them the actual language to have good input, constructive input, in a way that makes them feel and see that they are having real impact, I think is never a bad thing.
Hey, comment. The greatest typographer I've ever met is actually a DevOps guy.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
I would settle for developers just knowing HTML and CSS because, you know, let's face it, pretty much every app that we build nowadays is some flavor of web app. And I think it's kind of no longer acceptable for you to be a developer building one of these things and not know how to code UI to some degree. You know, I'm not saying you need to be the best at it necessarily, but it's part and parcel of your toolkit. I'm convinced that a lot of unnecessary back-ending complexity in applications is simply a form of procrastination by developers who refuse to just get to grips with the basics of HTML and CSS. Beyond that, I would say there's a huge amount of value in just having some familiarity with basic design patterns on the web. I mean, a vast amount of the work that I end up doing is making forms, designing forms, and I think there are only so many ways you can do a form, and I think developers could save themselves a heck of a lot of kind of time and effort just by getting to grips with some basic kind of design patterns and really kind of learning them by rote even. Just reuse the same damn thing every time and have a designer come and kind of finesse it for you. But that it would save a huge amount of time and pain for them as well, I think.
Okay, so we're coming into the final open form question. I would just invite the audience now, if you do have questions, please add them into the question area, and I will ask the panelists for you. Guys, should designers code? Is there a definitive answer?
I think we can safely say no, for a few reasons.
No, for what?
No, that there's not a definitive answer. Sorry.
Okay.
It could be yes, it could be no, because it's ultimately such a contextual question. Especially if we're asking should rather than must, which I'm going to parse language this one time for that specific purpose, because your ability to learn code, actually, to Stuart's point about certain developers who we've all met and have been frustrated with not knowing front-end code as well as we would hope, well, that's a great reason to be a designer that knows front-end code. It really, really depends on the context of your team and your problem set and your space and the product that you're working on and 1,000 other things, whether or not you should know code for this context. It's my opinion, and I think it's everyone on the opinions panel, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, that it's never a bad thing to know at least a little bit about the materials that we're working with, the things that we're designing for. And the real crux of the question comes from, is it the best use of our time and ability and knowledge? And that, I think, is an open question because it's so contextual. It depends on what you're applying that use and ability and knowledge for.
Okay.
Someone has to disagree with me on that. Something.
Yeah, I'm like, come on, guys.
I agree with everything Colin said, actually. I mean, but I think just to add to that, I think the future for me in terms of designers is actually having more designers on teams. You know, actually having more capability there, so that you don't necessarily have to encompass all these skills in one person. You know, it's this kind of like, I think to go back to the point I made at the beginning around your great value for money if you can do all these things. That's absolutely not the way we want to be going. You know, I mean, and if you've ever kind of had the pleasure of kind of having someone who's a researcher on your project and you just do the design, you see the value that comes from that synthesis of having people sort of specializing in those two different roles under the broad umbrella of user experience design, whatever you want to kind of call it. So I think more designers, whether they're generalists, specialists, but working together, I think that's definitely where I want to see it go, because it's I think the tide is turning as well. I mean, I get the sense that people are kind of waking up to the kind of value of kind of having more designers working on projects, but it's still a little bit of an argument that one still has to make, I think.
Okay. There's no more discussion on that. I think we can open up to Q&A. All right, we'll move into it. So Bruce has asked a question. Can someone briefly list for me the different categories of design, say UI, UX? Because I think one's involvement in the coding varies with the depth of design involvement. We touched on this, but if someone could address that question directly, that would be great.
I will. There's no definitive list. That's one of the problems. Our space is emerging, or is evolving and changing rapidly with the advent of designing for different things, right? The more traditional kind of, basically the technologies that have been around for a while, we have fairly discrete lines around. This person's an illustrator, this person's a book designer, they're a graphic designer, whatever these things might be, posters, communication design, UX designer, UI designer, product designer, front-end developer. I'm sure I can think of more. We don't have really solid definitions on these things, which is one of the reasons we get into this debate all the time, right? Because should a front-end developer know code? Well, yeah, of course, that's easy. Should a UI developer, or UI designer rather? Well, it depends on how much they're actually building. which depends on literally not only your team and your context, but sometimes the individual. We're all still picking our own titles, our own categories, and I think because of that, we're not. This is just. We need a more concrete language, and unfortunately, I don't think that's going to come with anything time. So sorry, that was a kind of a non-answer to your question, but I think the real crux of the question you were asking.
Yeah, but don't you think that right now, where we stand, we are not like mature enough to have this sort of definitions? Because if you go as a designer in a project, you're gonna do so many different things, and you can't just stay and say, oh no, I won't do this because I am a UI dev. I won't be doing this visual thing because this is not what I'm here for. So this is so new. Like, we have been working with digital for not that long, so it might not be the time to start these definitions. Or maybe these definitions might never come because they might be keeping you from doing things, you know.
I think
Go on, sure.
the definitions are always there, Barbara. I mean, that's part of the problem in a way, because I think, you know, I mean, certainly in my experience since I've been working here at ThoughtWorks, we've gone from eight kind of different sets of capabilities under experience design down to maybe 5, down to 3, and we'll probably go back up to 8 again at some point. So and there's value in that, because there's value in knowing, you know, this project demands someone who knows a bit about information architecture. Okay, and that, I mean, it's useful sometimes to kind of say, to classify people that way, but I think, I mean, that's part of the reason why I now tend to sort of want to shovel that to one side and think about design as some behavioral attributes. It's my attitude. It's the things that I think about and bring to the project, and personally it helps me a lot, because it means that I don't get too hung up on what specific category of capability am I applying at this point in time. I'm actually just thinking, well, am I visualizing the problem here? And if I'm not visualizing the problem, I know that I'm not doing my job, and the details of it are less important to me than just knowing that I'm adopting the right attitude. So that has been my kind of solution to the problem, and just in terms of absolutely going super simple on it, and just thinking, you know, what kind of behavior do I want to exhibit here in front of my team, in front of my clients and things like that. But I think it's probably going to stick around, because we just love to classify things. It's just in human nature. We just love to categorize and simplify, and then make things more complex, and then simplify again. It's going to be ebb and flow for as long as we have careers.
Awesome.
I mean, the analogy I like in this space is actually musical genre, right? Because electronic music is so broad as to be useless. But deep house, what is deep house? Like, I don't know. It's like 2 bands, right? There's this thing, literally there's this thing, sorry. It's whatever genre you'd call Cocteau Twins. It's literally 2 bands. That's not a genre, that's 2 bands. And it's the exact same thing with designers and these titles that we are giving ourselves. We can either be so specific, I can write this much front-end code, I can do these things, I can produce these deliverables, be outcomes focused, or we can be, like Stuart says, thinking focused, but I think neither really gives us good, stable categories, and I don't know that we're ever going to have them, frankly. So.
Okay, we've got another question from Zaid. Hasn't the market already decided they want designers who have some front-end dev or prototyping skills? And by market, I mean the direction UX teams are going in, prototyping, A/B testing, and the fact that the job market is essentially musical chairs.
Yes, you could argue that, but is that a long-term view? I don't think it is. I think it's a race to the bottom at the moment, and I think the first kind of companies that realize that they need to change tack and not kind of go for this you know, lowest price kind of people who can do everything at once are the ones that are going to ultimately kind of win out, because I think it's becoming, we talk about unicorns and things like that, and some of them do exist, but some of the language you see in job adverts around UX nowadays, I mean, it's actually been this way for quite a long time. It's just terrible. I mean, it's like it really doesn't speak to what you actually need to do on a project. It's just like, just give me all this stuff that you can do and I'll figure out how to commoditize you as best as I possibly can. And it doesn't make for a particularly great experience for you as a designer working in that kind of environment as well. So I think to some extent I agree the market has spoken, but I think the market is wrong. I think the market is going to have to wake up and change.
I saw a great article from the, I believe it was the DEO of Airbnb, which is saying that he wants Airbnb not to be a design-led organization, because I think it should be a design-led organization. The point he was making is we're heading into one potential future where it's not talked about as a differentiator or as a separate skill or commodity you need to buy. It's just there and it permeates everything from the UX function through to the developers, through to the sales team, and I think that's an interesting perspective. Actually, with the rise of design over the last decade, how do we then proceed whether it's just taken for granted that these considerations are part of doing business in the digital world?
Okay, thanks guys. Kirith would like to know, do designers end up resenting the developers who are forced to make the trade-offs for them, often in favor of reducing their own workload?
I feel like that's a question that begs a specific answer. Yeah, absolutely. But if you don't have the language, the understanding, the ability to make those choices, someone is making those choices. They're not going unmade. I think, yeah, absolutely that resent exists. But it shouldn't, and it's ultimately on you to not, right? Because these are exactly the kind of things. But this is ultimately, that's a question of literacy, not ability. You can make those trade-offs effectively without knowing code. So, also I looked it up. It's dream pop. That was the genre I was looking for. Dream pop.
Do designers end up resenting developers? I can only answer this from my personal point of view, I suppose. I don't want to speak for everyone in the panel, but I think absolutely not. I mean, I think one of the nicest things I kind of found about working in cross-functional teams, where there's, you have a relatively kind of flat hierarchy, is that you don't have to be the person who makes all the design decisions. I mean, actually, some great design decisions have been made by developers, and it's like, oh, shit, I wish I'd thought of that. I mean, that's a great idea, and that's those. I live for those moments. I live for those moments when we're on the same page because we can see the problem in the same way. But making kind of trade-offs is an interesting one, because I think it's like you have to get comfortable with the fact that the way you maybe thought it was going to be done and your vision for it isn't necessarily how it's going to end up, and you have to get comfortable with iteration. You have to get comfortable with making trade-offs, and sometimes that's quite hard for designers. I've seen a lot of designers struggle with that, in terms of, it's the cliche of pixel perfection versus ship the damn thing, and it's there's a midpoint there. But it's something you have to get right in your own head, I think, as a designer. You have to kind of get comfortable with that. I think the more you can kind of see the value in other areas beyond being the custodian of the actual UI in its completeness and in its entirety, the easier it is to kind of feel some degree of comfort with that.
We've got some great advice here from Scott, and I feel like we've got an engineer among us. Don't be that guy that designs something completely outlandish that the client falls in love with, but is a complete nightmare to code.
I mean, I always share what I design with my team before clients, because that's a bullshit test. That lets you know if you're going to do that to someone, because that becomes an empathy question, right? And it's a democratization of design thing, right? Like, one of the reasons that resent builds is because you're holding on to your design, your perfect version of the world like this. right? And I think that's a very, very dangerous pattern, not just because it will make you frustrated yourself, but also because you're not always right. Like Stuart said, a lot of great design decisions come from business stakeholders, come from analysts, come from developers, come from people on the street, come from the world at large. And if you're doing this, if you are thinking of your perfect kind of your perfect design, you're going to be disappointed. And you're also not always going to be making the best thing you can.
Yeah, and this maybe just add to something you said before, that if you're not making this choice, someone will for you. So the more you grab through your design and you say you want to do that, because this is the best way to do, and you present this to the client, someone will have to make this choice for you and say, no, we won't be doing this, and this is impossible, and choices like that. So I think the one of the answers to this question might be in this choice making, you know.
Whenever I hear the word design, my head always splits in two, because there is the solution concept, that broad sense of the word, and then there is the visual implementation, which all too often we and our clients get hung up on. I think on the visual side of things, the world we live in, as far as I'm concerned, the value of static mock-ups is dead. Right? I mean, there are better tools and techniques to communicate visual directions, but again, getting something into code as quickly as possible, and preferably pairing with developers, whether that's a front-end developer, back-end developer, and anything else developing. Then that speaks to the solution design. Again, the sooner you get something in its raw state working in code, and you are meeting some kind of business value, even if it's not the final implementation, that's what we should all be aiming for, right? Because it's a lot easier to pivot based on the feedback that we get, whereas if you wait until that point that you implement, as Connor says, the perfect picture, which actually is only 1% of the 99% of use cases that a digital thing can possibly live in now, I just see that as wasteful.
I mean, I actually don't have a problem with designers who want to do mock-ups in Photoshop and stuff. I don't, pick your tools. Use whatever tools you're comfortable with. I think it's more the attitude aspect of it. Again, I'm sounding like a kind of broken record here a little bit, but I think it's perfectly possible to use Photoshop, but to approach your work in the right way. And to be open to having a dialogue around the right kind of way to kind of come up with the best possible design, and also show some degree of like humility as well, because it's quite stressful being put in the position of being the design guy a lot of times. Hey, what should this look like, right? If I'm honest, half the time it's like, I don't know. I don't know if this is right or not, but I'll just be honest about that, acknowledge it, and sort of say, however, I do know that this is a way of doing it that might work, and let's kind of try this as a starting point, and be perfectly kind of open about your own limits to your own knowledge, because no one really knows, at the kind of granular level whether something's absolutely the right decision or not, until you've kind of validated it, until you've kind of gone through some sort of process of getting some feedback, and ultimately you should be getting that feedback from the end users. I mean, I guess that's to James's point. The faster you can get that feedback, if you get something into production out there and people can kind of look at it, then the easier it is to know where you're going wrong and to kind of correct your course. Do something different.
I think that quite often having the perfect solution is not necessarily the best design, because for as long as that solution doesn't exist in working software, it's not real.
Okay, everyone. Marguerite offers some wonderful advice, and she says, I don't advocate for designers being experts in every little thing that is said good designers should know about, but I do advocate for individuals to learn whatever they find valuable for them and for their craft. No knowledge barriers, because I'm a designer, I don't do that. What have you got to say to that?
I agree with it, but there's a sideways danger of the other thing, right? Which is you have to say no at some point. And that's a personal choice, where you say no and what the things you say no to, but that is that danger of becoming an ineffectual generalist, right? Is if you're just saying yes, yeah, I can do that, Not necessarily that you are an ineffectual generalist and that you don't know enough about certain things, but literally there are only so many hours in the day and so many ways you can approach a problem at once. And if I've got to pretend to be 8 different things at once, I'm going to let something slip somewhere. You can have many hats. I don't believe you can wear many hats at the same time. Or at the very least, you'll play the fool. Right?
I think what that makes me think of is that this very, very nebulous concept called good taste, and it's almost impossible to really put your finger on what it means. But I think good taste comes from, I guess, experience, but also having an active and broad interest in lots and lots of different things, because you don't necessarily know where the best ideas are going to come from. I think it's there's a fantastic video on YouTube, actually. Ira Glass, who does This American Life, talks about taste and the value of taste. I encourage people to watch it. It's a really fantastic sort of explanation of it. I mean, as I said, it's a nebulous concept. I would struggle to define it, but go listen to him talk about it, and it's a really interesting kind of listen if you're a designer, because actually you start to think about the value in being interested in stuff that's completely unrelated to your kind of your job, you know. I mean, personally, I'm a total comic book nerd, right? And I think I've learned more about design from reading comics than I have necessarily from reading, you know, graphic design books and things like that.
Well, there you go. There's the career advice for those budding designers of you out there.
No, it's not career advice. No, please.
Guys, we're just coming into the final 4 minutes, and Jonathan has sent in a really great question that I think will end things quite nicely. Is it true that designers who don't understand the relative complexity of the implementation of their design are not capable of making intelligent trade-offs of value versus effort? 4 minutes.
I might say something just to break the silence.
Sorry, guys.
I think that yes, you need to understand what you are proposing and the effort people will need to put on this, to solve this, or to develop this feature or this or whatever you are proposing for the team. And there is an advantage if you can negotiate this and you know how to do that. So this might be even more than knowing how to code, but knowing how to negotiate things you want to get done and things you know that need to be done. But yeah, it would be something like that, code skills and negotiation, so you can have your user won't be losing anything when you negotiate with your tech team.
We've touched on the metaphor a couple of times today of material, right? And I think whether you're an artist working with stone or canvas, or you're an engineer or you're a digital designer, the more you understand the properties of that medium that you're working in, the more successfully you can manipulate and control it, and ultimately bend it to your will.
I would agree with that question. Is that the right way to say it? Yeah, I mean, designers who don't understand the relative complexity are incapable of making intelligent trade-offs. And for me, that's a kind of little bit of a smell, you know, around the kind of type of person you're working with, because there is more than enough complexity in any kind of business domain, or in terms of understanding what the right decision to make is, without introducing unnecessary complexity into design. That's not really the attitude you should be taking. I mean, I think everyone's probably maybe worked with people like this who think that their job is to over-engineer the thing. You know, it's like you've got a simple website that maybe has like five, you know, 2 layers of navigation, and you need to kind of implement some massive doormat overlay interaction pattern. I mean, that's just styling. That's nothing to do with design. That's being a stylist. You know, you're just like cherry picking stuff and making it unnecessary kind of complex without thinking about what is the simplest way I could express this in the first place. By all means, add complexity later if it becomes appropriate and if there's a need for it, but you should be aiming for the kind of the simplest thing first. I mean, and the designers, if you work with designers who aren't doing that, then I don't know, get another designer.
All right, we are just coming up to time now, so I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you, panelists. That was a great discussion. And I don't think we put the argument to bed, which is unfortunate, because I know there are many designs out there that we're hoping we would. We will be, this Hangout will be on our YouTube channel at ThoughtWorks, and we'll also be continuing on with an article follow-up as well. So don't forget to check out the polls. I can't wait to see the results of that and see if anyone's minds out there have been changed. Thanks so much, everyone. It was great having you all, and have a great day, evening, morning. Ciao.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.